as a refresher for people, or if you want to share it with some of the folks on your team. And this will be, like I said, not very long at all, but I do appreciate you taking a few minutes out of the day to connect. I want to kind of reinvigorate programs. And I do want to give a shout out. Mark did an extensive study last week looking at our Part B utilization. And I know he'll have other comments, and your area managers and regionals will have other comments specific to your sites. But I do want to say it looks like overall you guys are doing a really pretty good job with looking for the Part B folks, making sure that we're not neglecting needs that people might have after so much time of some things being a little bit sideways. But what I want to talk about this afternoon for just a few minutes is just some reminders on some things and some things to consider, some screening strategies to think about with some specific areas of potential concern that I would want to make sure we're thinking about everything, not skipping over something just in the, sometimes when we screen, we have our typical ways of screening, and there may be some of the things we want to be careful to look for, especially at this point in the road. So we know that it's been about 13 months since things have been normal, whatever that normal would have been. It's hard to remember those days, right? But we know it's been about 13 months that since people have maybe been in a little bit more of an isolated situation. We've had more of a shortage of STNAs. People had to be in their rooms. They had to be quarantined. So they've been spending overall the past 13 months a lot more time in bed, a lot less time being active, which to me then elevates a lot more concerns. And so I want to remind folks some things about splinting, wheelchair positioning, and self-feeding are the topics for today. Down the road, we'll have other Zoom sessions like this, short but sweet, some strategies on screening for some other areas to make sure that we're firing on all 8 cylinders, I guess you could say. So, when we're looking for people, my concern is with orthotics. Our utilization of the orthotic code for the first quarter of 2019 compared to the first quarter of 2021, we're down about 126 units. And I know we're down a few buildings as well. We've taken away. So it's the net change is just a few buildings, but we're a little bit off on our utilization of the orthotic code. And I just want to remind you and remind your teammates, whoever is doing the screenings, to really have those STNAs show you or show the person doing the screening how that person is moving. So, do they have full range of their hands and their wrists? How are their arms, shoulders, and elbows doing? If the bed is flat, do their hips go straight? Do their knees go straight? Can their ankles, go up and down all the way? Again, with the screening, we don't touch. And so people who have difficulty demonstrating full range of motion, we might need to have the STNA show us that they've got full range of motion. And I don't want, because we've all seen that the contractures creep in. Somebody lacks 10 to 20 degrees extension at the hips, and then it becomes 20 to 30 degrees, and then it becomes more and more. And so pretty soon when they go to stand up, they're standing in the shape of the wheelchair, right? Not a good thing. So make sure that if it's a person who can't demonstrate range of motion, that you have the STNA show you their range of motion, and really look for those neutral planes, whether it's the hips, the knees, the elbows going out straight, that type of thing, the hand being able to fully extend, so that we don't let those contractures creep in. And, if nothing else, maybe you can watch the STNA do a transfer with that person. So you can really see, are they bearing weight? What are their transfer skills like? Do their hips and knees fully extend? What's going on with their bodies? Please don't or whoever's doing the screening, make sure those areas don't get overlooked. I know that we try to go through screenings quickly, which is essential, but make sure that we're not missing something in terms of observing some creeping in kind of decreased range of motion. We don't want people to get stuck in that wheelchair position. We don't want people to be in the fetal position when we can help avoid it. I did talk to one of the orthotic vendors, and he said that the demand for splints is way down, production is way down, and so their product line has also shrank as well. So we need to make sure that if we need what we need, be aware that we might have to come up with some alternatives or substitutions, because you can't I tried to get something that used to be readily available for a patient I was seeing, and you can't always get it anymore. So be aware we might have to make some substitutions. Other than that, along the lines of those contractures creeping in, let's make sure we're critically looking at wheelchair positioning. Again, it's been 13 months where folks maybe have not spent as much time out of bed because there's not enough STNAs, because. So if they're not in the wheelchair that much, they're going to have decreased, as trunk strength. Their mobility is going to be decreased, maybe decreased ability to propel that chair, functional distances. So again, make sure that we're looking at, are they sliding into posterior pelvic tilt because their hamstrings are tight? Are they laterally leaning because their trunk is weak from not being up in the chair as much as they used to be? They're spending less time out of bed, so they have less tolerance for being upright. What's going on with their lung functioning, their digestive tract? All those things get impacted by being in bed more than being in a chair. So be considerate of those things when you're doing the screenings. Or again, remind the staff that is doing the screenings to really be sensitive and careful to not let a little problem creep into a big problem when it comes to wheelchair positioning. There may be some increased behaviors when we're looking at sometimes the people that are attempting to stand and have falls. Is the chair really fitting them now? And there could be a lot of changes over the past year because they weren't in the chair as much. Are they crying out? Are there more behaviors being demonstrated? Maybe they're uncomfortable in that chair because all of a sudden there are enough STNAs or there aren't enough STNAs, whichever way your building's going. So they're up in a chair for 6 or 8 hours when maybe all they can do is tolerating, 2 to 4 hours. So again, let's really critically look at wheelchair positioning, wheelchair mobility. If they haven't been up, they haven't been moving, they may be some weakness in the legs or the arms to actually propel themselves. So all those things we want to make sure that we're looking out for carefully with people when we're doing those kind of screenings. If for those that are not really familiar with a lot of the programs that we're going to be talking about, under the employee portal on our website, we do have all those programs listed. There's cheat sheets for like inexpensive fixes for wheelchair positioning issues. There's a cheat sheet to say, okay, if they're doing posterior pelvic tilt, consider A, B, or C to try to fix that issue. So for example, if wheelchair positioning isn't strongly in your wheelhouse, there's a lot of resources available on our website for that. And we have some low-tech interventions as well. Especially that can be helpful if we're waiting for a custom chair to come in. Again, the vendors haven't been able to come into the buildings. Now they're starting to be allowed to in a lot of our sites. But we've had this year of a gap. So what we need to do to try to do a temporary fix is better than no fix. And some of those suggestions are on our website. My concern with this is that again, comparing the first quarter of 2019 to the first quarter of 21, our utilization of the wheelchair code is down 450 units. Again, that's a lot of wheelchair stuff that I'm concerned is a need that we're not fully meeting at the moment. So be extra sensitive to that when you're doing the screenings. My last bullet point for today is going to be self-feeding. Again, this is something that is pretty easy to screen for, but I'm not so sure that we're consistently doing it because as I scan through all the different Planet Cares in different buildings, I don't see a lot of self-feeding goals. I'm not saying that they're not there, but I'm not seeing a whole bunch of them. Again, we've had a year where people have had to eat in isolation. They've been eating in bed. They've, not had the socializing. They've not had the demonstration of the other people at the table eating. So there's been the weight loss. There's decreased intake. STNAs are stretched thin, so they're not necessarily there to help feed them and give them the nutrition that they need. As Mark said last week, they're wearing half of the lunch on their clothing or hidden in the bed sheets. STNAs don't have time to worry about it, so they pick up the tray, they mark, yep, he ate half the meal, not realizing that really half the meal, the other half was folded up in the blankets and sheets and that type of thing. So again, be very careful to look at how self-feeding is really going. Maybe do a dining room screen. It's so easy to make sure whoever's doing the screenings in your building, that they walk through the dining room and watch people at meals. What is their wheelchair positioning looking like? Can they get up close enough to the table? What's their motor skills? What's their visual skills? Are they able to self-feed effectively? And if you're starting to have issues or concerns, again, that's just to trigger the eval. And if in this case OT, or if it's a concern about swallowing speech, they may do an eval only and say, yeah, okay, they're really pretty much where they're at. Or they may actually be able to intervene with the plan of care to get them on a road to doing something a little bit better than what they're doing right now. Please consider doing the dining room screens for the buildings that have folks eating in a common area again. Please make sure to screen, maybe going down the hallways at lunchtime after the trays have been delivered, and see what's going on with people. If they're eating in their room or if they're eating in bed, how is it looking? What can we do to make it better for that person so that there isn't the weight loss? Again, looking at posture, looking at their ability to reach everything that's on the tray. Are they able to manipulate the utensils? All that kind of good stuff. Can they butter their own bread? That type of thing. Open up the packets. Again, if when possible, and I know that some of our buildings still have a lot of the folks that were there in 2019. So when you can, look at an OT or a speech plan of care from 2019 for that individual and see if there's been a change. That might be a quick way to look back and know if they were feeding themselves completely independently and now it's a little bit different. Let's at least look at them for an eval, potentially putting them on caseload for what we can do. You know, feeding is one of the last skills that leaves us when we have issues with dementia and that type of thing. And so it's so related to satisfaction and dignity and all those kinds of things. You know, if you really want that extra bite of noodles or whatever, but somebody's poking a fork full of green beans in your mouth, that's not satisfying. So if we can help promote people being independent with self-feeding, again, that's such a huge win for those individuals that have lost so much. And since it's one of the last skills to leave, let's not just let it walk out the door without giving the person a fighting chance to resume some of those skills. Even if it's just finger foods or beverages, or we put everything in a mug or a bowl to make it more manageable for them. Again, those are the things that we would definitely want to be looking at with self-feeding. Again, dignity and all those kind of good things. And it's pretty easy to look at. You know, sometimes you might catch an STNA doing a transfer with somebody. Great, good way to observe how that person's doing. But they're eating 3 times a day, so it should be pretty easy to catch somebody, you know, taking a few bites of a meal. And again, we want to make sure that we don't let those folks decline without giving it a fighting chance. So that is pretty much what I wanted to remind you of. I know that you know how to do these things, but some of the screening tips to make sure that we're looking for these things, looking for those subtle changes, or in some cases not so subtle changes, because it's been so long since we have had normalcy, since staffing has been strong. Some of our buildings have really struggled with STNAs. So I want to make sure that any little decline, we're being extra sensitive to and doing the best we can do to counteract that decline. So at this point, I will open it up for questions and or Mark or Malia or Margie, if you have comments.
I'd like to jump in. Thank you, Cindy. To piggyback on a couple of the points that Cindy said, you know, she talked about looking at your POCs. Well, when you're doing your screens, are you taking, I know the screen form has their status as of their last TC. Are you comparing it to that when folks are doing the screens? So remind whoever's doing your screens to look at that on your screen form, so you have that last status to see if there is a change. I think that's one. I think when you do that comparison versus their last therapy round, as to where they're at now, you may see some differences you probably wouldn't have recognized. Secondly, we all know, at least in Ohio, state surveyors are starting back up again this month. And so with that, I can guarantee you they're going to be looking into range of motion declines. And I think it's very important that we go back and that we are addressing, you know, the issues with, doesn't necessarily mean they need a splint or orthotic, but we should still be looking at those range of motions. I think Cindy brought up a very valid point of someone still in the shape of their chair when they're in bed, you know, or they go to stand up and can't at that point in time. I think that's an avenue where I feel like in reading through POCs as I bought through buildings, that's probably an area maybe we're maybe a touch behind where we could be on that. So I'd like to see all of us take the time to address those needs as well with folks, and even just self-propelling. How many patients used to propel in the hallways that aren't anymore? You know, now granted, they may not have as many places to go, but that's still a functional task and they still have the right to move where they can in the building. So is that something that we can look at? I'd be willing to bet if you stood in a hallway and watched, see how many patients could cross the thresholds of their room out into the hallway, you'd probably be surprised how many folks used to zip through probably aren't crossing that threshold anymore, especially if their room transitions from carpet to tile coming into the hallways. That's going to be, how many folks did we find stuck somewhere because they can't get over that 1/4 inch threshold? So that's another area where you can screen relatively easily. And then my other point is, you know, on my screen, Mary Lou and Stacy, you are only 2 speech SLPs on here. So for the rest of you, talk with your speech therapist when they're in patient rooms about looking for this thing Cindy said. Do they have half their lunch on them? You know, do they have it on the floor? Did they drop silverware? Are they routinely dropping it? Do they have to wait for someone to come and unwrap their silverware or to open their food? Those are things that speech therapy, because you're sitting there at meals more so than anybody else, that you talk to your speech therapist about sending that referral back to OT potentially for those eating and feeding things. I would think at this point in time, adaptive equipment, How many of us have done a run through in our buildings with adaptive equipment that we issued back in 2019 or 2020 to see if it's still being used? I can tell you state surveyors are going to be using that as well.
Yeah.
So that's something I think we should all be doing, you know, an audit on to see where we were. I know Donica and Colleen, you guys have been at the building when it transitioned over from ownership. So there still should be a record somewhere of who has those devices. And Missy, you're new to the building there, and we're new to them, and they're new to that building too. So they should have some lists. It probably would be a good idea to go back and audit and look at those adaptive equipments and even splints and braces too, to see where they are. That's, to me, splints and braces are the scariest part when surveyors come in, because there's usually a list of what we did in therapy, and then there's usually a referral of some sort, and then it disappears into the ethers the rest of the time. You know, and then we've got screens saying no functional change, but there's not been a brace applied since the day we handed it over to nursing. You know what I mean? So that's an area I'd like for all of us to follow up on too, is how many adaptive equipment, splints and braces we've put out, and range of motion changes. So, and feeding. So the list keeps going. I'll slow down a bit, but you know, overall, in terms of percentage of folks on Part B, I think we're doing a pretty good job as a company overall, but I want us to make sure that we're addressing all the needs, not just the, I hate to say low hanging fruit, but the easier ones to find. So I want to make sure that we're addressing, doing a full 360 view of the patient, and not just necessarily transfers or, you know, walking, something like that, or ADLs. Okay. And I'm done, Cindy, for
Okay.
now.
Okay. Yeah, and just remind everybody, our screening form was intended that when we're going to discharge somebody and they're going to be long-term, the easiest thing to do is grab a blank screening form if they're new to us and now, you know, coming in from the community, and to fill out that far left-hand column on the screening form about prior level. You discharge them today, okay, 412, this is their status. So that 3 months from now, it's very easy to see if there's been a change or not. So remember, the screening form was intended to be easy to use. Grab it, fill in that prior level when you're discharging somebody, so that it's very easy down the road to see any of those changes that are going on functionally. So any other questions or comments from anybody? Open up the floor here for people. I'm scrolling through my screen in case somebody's got a hand up or waving frantically. Okay. All right. Well, if there's no questions, you guys know how to find myself, you know how to find your area manager, or regional director, certainly Mark. If you have questions or concerns, we'd be happy to help address it with you.
Cindy,
And
I have one
yes,
other thing. So
time's
as
up.
we've been out, sorry, one more thing. So as Margie and Malia and Tiffany and Tom have been out, you know, one thing that I've seen on the trip reports that they're doing seems to be the screen forms being kept up with timely. And so that's an area, I know I see both of them shaking their heads, Tiffany too, with things about, we have to keep up on those screens. That is our record that we took a look at that patient. That also will tell us when we come into audit how thoroughly we're looking over our patients as well. So please make sure your screens are up to speed, that they're where you can find them in your binders, and that you have your quarterly calendars, okay?
Yeah, surveyors will nail you if you don't, so take care of that first. Okay. All right. No other questions or comments from anybody? All right. All right. Well, thank you for attending today. Appreciate your kind attention. I will, again, share this with each of you in case there's other people in your buildings that you want to have hear this, whoever your primary screeners might be. And again, thank you for everybody's hard work. Again, Mark in the chat box is saying, thank you, everybody. Have a great week. I echo that, and thank you for your hard work every day on behalf of our residents. Have a good rest of the week. See you next time. Bye.